My group was assigned Ancient Greece for the group presentation project. Ancient Greece is a civilization that took place between the Dark Ages of the 12th and 9th centuries BC and came right before the Middle Ages and the Byzantine era. One of the many areas of interest within the ancient Greece is how they lived their day-to-day life. This varied between each social class. There were 4 primary social classes made up of the upper, middle, lower classes, and the slaves. Although these classes meant that there were very many differences between the people of Greece, there were also some basic things that were shared among them, such as their questionable medicinal practices. This is a big part of what is going to be presented, as well as how a part of these Greeks were brought up within this video produced by Grunge, which is a news website for history and science.
Compared to other ancient civilizations, life was simpler back in Greece, right? Wrong. While we'd like to imagine it as a cultured and sophisticated society, there's absolutely no way you'd survive life in ancient Greece for long. Here's why. Feeling unwell? Prior to the 5th century BCE, the human body was basically left to the mercy of the gods. Patients often participated in a healing ritual called temple sleep, or incubation. It's exactly what it sounds like. Patients would literally just go to sleep in a temple, and then in the morning, they'd tell a priest about their dreams from the night before. Based on that dream, the priest would then prescribe a remedy, usually in the form of an incantation or a charm of some sort, or they'd simply declare the patient healed. There were technically doctors back then, but there weren't any specific requirements for people who advertised themselves as such. And as for surgery, these were the kinds of tools that were used, the stuff of nightmares.
This is going to be extremely painful, Mr. Verrill.
Meanwhile, anyone who happened to live in Athens in 430 BC had a roughly 25% chance of dying in a horrible way. That's because a mysterious plague broke out that lasted for about 5 years, and the death toll was catastrophic. The plague ended up killing somewhere between 75,000 to 100,000 people. Many aspects of the human body were a complete mystery in ancient Greece. People firmly believed that if a woman was ill, it was likely because she'd fallen victim to a wayward womb. You heard that right. This ancient piece of pseudoscience even had a name, the Wandering Womb. Some physicians believed the womb was an entirely separate entity that just so happened to live inside women. According to Wired, it was widely believed that these freewheeling wombs would be coaxed back into place by applying pleasant smells to a woman's you-know-what. Meanwhile, highly unpleasant smells were applied to whatever part of the body the womb had theoretically wandered off to. Oh, and there was another treatment prescribed for keeping a womb in place: pregnancy. And in the ancient world, pregnancy and delivery were exceptionally dangerous. According to women in antiquity, a pregnancy was prescribed for everything from fever and insomnia to chronic back pain. Jeez. Sparta is widely considered to be the most militaristic of the Greek city-states. At the height of its power, around 404 BC, the city of Sparta didn't even have walls. Inhabitants evidently felt that they didn't need them, because they had Spartans. When it comes to Sparta, figuring out what's real and what's fiction can be tough. We know the land in Sparta was very fertile, and not having to worry about food meant that people could focus on other hobbies, like poetry and bloody battle.
This is Sparta!
Sparta's militaristic bent began when it managed to conquer the neighboring land of Messenia, turning its inhabitants into slaves. Boys were trained from the age of 7 to 20, and they were basically expected to be resistant to hunger and cold, despite having given precious little in the way of food, clothing, or supplies. If they were suspected of having any kind of disability, the Spartans would kill them, usually when they were infants. According to National Geographic, the only time these slaves got a break from training was when they were actually at war.
Alright, so starting at the top of the social class pyramid is the upper class. The upper class was made up of a very small group of citizens. According to Hierarchy Structure, a website that gives information on various hierarchical and organizational structures, the upper class people didn't have jobs and were free from economic tasks such as economical trading. This group of people rather controlled things such as the government, war, literature, and philosophy for the ancient Greeks. They had owned slaves to tend to their land and fortunes. The women in these groups also had slaves, but they were still expected to manage their households. They were also to spin and weave cloth for their family. The slaves were more or less their helpers in these areas. The middle class was a bit larger group of non-citizens. Since these people were not originally born in Greece, they could never become citizens themselves. These people made sure the navy fleet was well maintained and that the hierarchical system was well maintained also throughout the city. They carried jobs such as merchants, contractors, manufacturers, tradesmen, craftsmen, and even artists. The women in these social classes still owned slaves, but much less of them than the upper class did. These women had lots of work to do with less slaves to help with their chores. The lower class, according to Maryville University, was just one step above the slaves, and in fact, many of them were previous slaves who had been freed. Although these people were free, they were not able to vote and were heavily told what to do by the upper classes. The women in the lower class worked for a living or sold items such as cloth, food, or other items. The slaves in ancient Greece had no legal rights at all and worked as servants or laborers. According to a hierarchy structure, many of these slaves were either prisoners of war or were brought over by foreign slave traders. The publicly owned city-state slaves actually had much more independence than the family-owned ones did. The women in this social class performed tasks such as spinning, weaving, cooking, cleaning, fetching water, or took on jobs such as nursing, dancing, or entertaining for the families that they worked for. Although this made for a rough life, there were various ways for slaves to gain their freedom. One way was that their ransom could be paid off by a family, friend, or by themselves through the little money that they had earned. Another would be for a slave to have fought in a war. They were often set free after the war was complete. If a slave's master had died, they would also often be let go. Lastly, yet unlikely, if a master felt that the slave's job was complete and that they had gotten their money's worth out of the individual, they could voluntarily set them free. Although all of these people lived in the same place as ancient Greece, they all had very different experiences as to which class they had grown up in and were born into. That is all for the day-to-day life for ancient Greece. Thank you.